For over 1,000 years, in ancient Greece, a priestess sat on a three-legged stool above a cleft in a holy earth, uttering enigmatic prophecies that shaped the fate of the world. Today, modern sibyls walk in her footsteps, sharing divinations and messages from the gods for the benefit of humanity. These are the women of the Via Carmen Pythia.
Hello and welcome. I'm Devanna Wolf.
And I'm Yeshe Matthews.
We're priestesses and sibyls in the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple, where we teach a 2-year sibyl training program called Via Carmen Pythia, or the Way of the Singing Oracle. This podcast grew out of our passion for the history and practice of divination and a desire to explore it from the perspective of modern sibyls.
Via Carmen Pythia is a deliberate blend of words from two different ancient languages, Latin, which was popular in Rome, and Greek. And the reason for this is because many of the sibyls that we study and emulate as part of this program were located in the regions of Roman and Greek territories in the ancient world, although there were also other sibyls all over the world. Part of what we study in the program is a profile of an ancient ancestress who practiced forms of divination every month as part of our 2-year program. We also study 22 different forms of divination, and we have labs and practices. It's important to us that we root our practice in the traditional while still evolving it in the modern.
Since our program is rooted in the lineage of the sibyls of the classical world, we wanted to include discussion of some of the ancient maxims that were associated with the famous oracle at Delphi. These short sayings were enigmatic bits of wisdom that survived the centuries and still offer us valuable meditations on life and the pursuit of wisdom. So today we're going to cover the maxim, worship the gods, along with a little exploration of the topic we're teaching this month in the program, Ornithomancy.
Worship the gods is such a potent maxim, and it's a great place to start because divination actually means receiving the voice of the divine. And so when we are channeling that voice of the divine in our divinations, in our readings for others, we have this opportunity to become the voice of whatever we hold most sacred. I think it's important to note that in the ancient world and today, all over the world, in various different cultures and traditions, worshiping the gods isn't done as a transactional, relational paradigm. Instead, people worship the gods because they know it's the right thing to do. They know that worshiping the gods makes them better people. All of the artfulness of the observation of ritual practices, the preparations such as fasting or offerings, the ceremonial activities that might cleanse or purify, as well as ultimately receiving that message from the voice of the divine that can give you guidance for the next steps of your life. That all ultimately benefits the practitioner to do it. It's not so much that the gods are hungry for our worship, rather that we are hungry for the results of our worship of them. You know, when you think about what it would have been like to go to, say, the oracle at Delphi in the ancient world, your typical Athenian who might be going on this pilgrimage of a lifetime, or even your statesman or military leader who might go frequently, would have to start out on a walk or on a journey from Athens to Delphi. And along the way, there'd be numerous shrines that one would pass by, roadside shrines. We know that there were shrines to Hermes, to Aphrodite, and Demeter and Persephone all along the route, as well as then, when you arrived in Delphi, you would typically go first to the Athena Pronea, which is the temple in the valley beneath Mount Parnassus. And there you would make tribute to Athena for granting you the journey from Athens. And also because there was a lot of pride in where you came from, there would usually be a large accompanying gift that would go in the Athenian treasury. One of the ways that different communities indicated to the gods how much they loved them, and in a way trying to curry their favor, were these enormous bequests that petitioners might bring. And we still see some of them today in the Archaeological Museum there in Delphi, most notably the bronze statue of the charioteer and his horses, a really amazing articulation for its time. We also see that then people would go to, up from the Athena Pronea to the Castalian spring, where they would perform a purification and wash themselves before then beginning to walk the way up to the Adityan. But they couldn't just even go right up to the oracular chamber after that. They still had to sacrifice a goat and have its entrails read to even see if they'd be allowed to have passage. So each step along this journey involved effort and involved putting in a willingness to earn one's answers. I think that today, as modern sibyls, one of the things that we need to remember is that when people come to us, mostly they haven't been acculturated to do that kind of in-depth personal preparation, and we could certainly not require it of them. So it's up to us to do it for them. And so when we, maybe say a prayer or light a candle or lay out some stones before a reading, in a way, that's our symbolic gesture of saying, look, the effort for us together, querent and reader, is worth putting in the little bit of energy, effort, these tokens. And you then, as the sibyl, set the tone for the reading to be something more elevated, not just your basic, kind of who, what, when, where, how. How about you? What are some of the ways that you sacralize your practice as a sibyl when you're doing readings?
Well, I have developed a practice of offering a very short prayer and an invitation to the ancestors, spirits, and guides of my querent to attend the reading and to offer any messages that they might feel are relevant. So I think that does surprise some people, but it also puts them at ease because it's personal, right? It's not just a come in, sit down, shuffle cards, and get an interpretation. We're there as priestesses to personalize the process and to welcome the querent into our relationship with the divine in how we worship and how we pay that respect. So, when they sit down to have a reading with us or with me, they are sitting down to an open channel from my practice with the gods and goddesses. And my respect for that advice and the messages that come through mean that answer for the querent is going to be more elevated and it's going to have more impact than just someone sitting and opining.
I really relate to what you're saying. I do the same thing. I've said the same prayer over my cards for now 20 years, and I say it before every reading, and my longtime clients have come to expect it and know it. And it's been interesting to watch because I start by asking, Great Mother, please be here. And then I also call on their ancestors, their guardians, their guides, as you do. And when I do this prayer, it's not always, but it's often enough that the querent will immediately begin to cry because their feeling of relieving themselves of the burden. They have brought their burden and they've laid it down on the altar, and they feel that I am there and I'm praying for them. And they know then there's going to be some way forward, and the relief, as well as, I think, them not feeling alone. When we invoke the presence through worship, we feel less alone. And so even if they might not be ritualists, or, they themselves might not be goddess devotees, the fact that I am can often be the difference for them between feeling like they're walking this path alone and that they might not be able to trust the answers, and actually being able to lay down their burden and trust that they're in the hands of a capable, grounded, caring, spiritually inclined woman who is ready and willing to help.
I agree with that. And I think that our presence as priestesses is almost enough on its own to help someone be able to see their situation through a different lens. And it helps them to open their own minds to the insights that come through the reading. And I think that just opening that channel can be so healing for a querent that it really just elevates the entire process of coming to look for advice and look for answers. So it really doesn't even need to have worship or faith or anything that we define in that way, but the mere presence puts people at ease and opens their minds and hearts to the process.
Well, we ourselves are embodying at that moment an energy that doesn't come from us, but through us, and is part of our training to be able to open up ourselves. And I think our own openness to that is what sets the tone for many querents to then feel safe to also open up. And I've had people who don't share my same beliefs, but really appreciate that I'm holding the space in my own sphere for them, and who also sometimes feel like maybe they've been wounded by patriarchal religions. And so the fact that I'm invoking Great Mother, Holy Mother, Wise and Gentle Mother, it gives them somewhere to go with feelings that they might find complicated in a more traditional religious sense.
Exactly. We are providing something more heart-centered and more personal and compassionate in general as priestesses and sibyls than even someone going to their, religious advisor if they belong to a church or another spiritual organization. The fact that we are outside of their regular lives and can still presence that flow of goddess is very disarming and heartening for people.
So as the winds of change come through March and we are opening ourselves to new possibilities with spring, and in the temple, we're in the month of moon and the wind dancing, it's reminding me of our topic of ornithomancy and the study of the birds. How do the flight patterns, movements, songs, sounds, and colors of the birds figure into your practice as a sibyl?
Well, I think the first thing is that birds awaken the dormancy that we've experienced over the winter. And although as a sibyl, my mind and my spirit are always open, there's something about spring and that element of air blowing through that really awakens extra senses for me. And it helps me connect with the natural world around me, which is a deep part of our Sibylline practice, right? It's having those connections and relationships with all of the beings and elements in the world around us. So birds are a great emblem of that awakening spirit, and the fact that they fly through our environment and our landscape means that they're sort of ripe for bringing messages. Birds have always historically represented messages from the other world. So it's interesting, since I've moved across the country in Maine, we've noticed a real lack of birds in the landscape, more so than where we came from. So it's just starting to sort of flitter in to our lives. I went outside this morning and noticed that there were songbirds, which was really exciting. But for the most part, what I've noticed in this landscape and birdscape is a lot of raptors. So a lot of predatory birds, really majestic, regal, powerful birds. So I see that as, a good sign of important happenings on the horizon. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. And I've never seen so many bald eagles here as
I was just going to ask how many what different types of raptors, and in your view, what do one or two of them mean? What do the bald eagles mean?
Yeah, bald eagles, I have to sort of relate them to, the country, especially being here in New England, where it was such a potent symbol of the birth of our country. So I really see the bald eagle as a symbol of power, a symbol of leadership, and a symbol of independence, really, which is good because that was part of our reason for moving here, was to really become more independent in our own lives and to really sort of sink into the path that we want to be on here. So I'm loving seeing so many eagles. We've seen some other types of hawks, but surprisingly no owls yet. We haven't heard any owls. We haven't seen any owls, which we're both sort of surprised by. But, there's more to come.
It might be a good thing that you're not seeing the owls. Some
Right.
traditions, you wouldn't want to see them, but yeah, I agree with the way that spring brings the birds back. And when you were talking, especially about your first winter here in Maine, and how you were so surprised by how few birds you were seeing. And it reminds me, here in Mount Shasta, we do have kind of a quiet winter. Usually January and February, things go very quiet. Lots of businesses close, lots of restaurants close, just because it's the off season. The ski park is really hopping, and a couple of restaurants are close to that. But for the most part, this area really shuts down for January, February, and almost into March. And during that time, we also have a kind of quietude of birds. A lot of them have just flown even an hour south to just be in a warmer area where there's not snow or ice. But in February and March, the dark-eyed juncos come back. There's this cute little flock of dark-eyed juncos that usually appear at our feeder somewhere between March 1st and spring equinox. They come along with the season, and it's almost like the wind blows them in. And they're such cute little society birds. They all love to talk. They're chattering at each other. Their quick little movements around the feeder are, kind of perky and lively. And then the other thing is that they really seem to look out for each other. There's usually one who's kind of watching and standing guard, and then another one will fly into that position and watch while the first one goes and eats. So for me, those little society birds are all about kind of people are coming back, life is coming back. In this area, we're going to see more people coming up for the spring and summer, because there are also folks who only come for seasonal visits. So there's sort of a community upwelling that I get with the dark-eyed juncos. But I did have one other thing that happened interestingly this month, which was that during an enormous rainstorm, I was coming home from getting some groceries, and Albert and I were in the car. We looked up, and there were hundreds and hundreds of vultures circling in three big groups. Each group was sort of overlapping. So they were like these three, it was almost like a trefoil, but with circles. And they went around and around and around, and each group was probably made up of between 70 and 100 vultures. So it was more vultures than I've ever seen in one place. And it was really unusual for them to be out in the rain like that, circling. And there wasn't anything visible around me that was dead that they might be circling over. And they were circling very high. It wasn't like the normal low circling over their intended meal. Instead, it was a high circling that was three circles circling. And so I'm really sitting with that. One of the things that we've talked about is how ornithomancy obviously has a lot of different expressions up to and including what they would do when they would sacrifice a bird and read its entrails, but we don't do that. But even looking at like different cultural meanings of various different birds and different ways of looking at them, there are so many ways of looking at them that it could become kind of confusing or overwhelming if you tried to apply everything to every bird you see. But I did notice this because it was so unusual. And that's one of the things that we've kind of given focus to this month, is not to feel like we have to be vigilant for every single bird, but rather to pay attention to the ones who really make themselves known. And I am going through a lot of changes in my schedule and my life. And also our town is going through a lot of changes right now in the city government and in terms of some businesses coming in and going out and projects. I just kind of felt like the buzzards were all circling, the vultures were all circling over this, and they were all circling over this particularly active section on the freeway where there's an on-ramp and an off-ramp, and the freeway runs through it. And I just got the feeling that there's something that's clearing out or moving out so that fresh life can come in this spring.
It almost sounds, from what you're describing, that those vultures were circling an aerial crossroads.
Yes.
Fascinating.
And they were right near the main creek and waterfall that runs through the town and supplies the town with the majority of its water. It's a branch of the upper fork of the Sacramento River. And I associate that with Oshun. And then I also associate vultures with Isis and Nebatet. So I have some thinking to do about maybe going to their altars and making some offerings and saying, yes, remove from me and from our city anything that needs to go in order for there to be life anew.
It's funny that you bring up vultures for this topic. Vultures are so unique. I think we often get accustomed and desensitized to seeing them because they're present a lot, as purifiers of the environment. But I also have a perception of vultures as really profound messengers. One of the most visionary things I've ever come across in my adult life was a dozen or so vultures perched in some very tall trees in the mists of morning with their wings spread wide. It's a phenomenon. It has a name that I can't recall right now, but it's a phenomenon where they're sunning their wings to warm them, and they do it in unison. And it is such a magnificent sight. I've only seen it one other time, but I'll tell you that moment that I saw the dozen of them with all their wings outstretched was like a convergence of mystic moments. It still sort of inspires me to this day. So I see vultures as that mystic messenger. So when they do appear in my birdscape with something unusual, I know to pay attention.
I wish I had a drawing that you did of that moment, I have to say, because that sounds so evocative and like such a significant, it should be on the front of a greeting card that you give to someone when you're saying, congratulations and condolences on your sudden life transformation. Because, right, it's both. It's like you see the vulture and you know things are going to change whether you like it or not. I also had another phenomena this month where I saw a bird in the coffee grounds really strongly in my coffee cup. And that led me on a kind of wild goose chase to go and discover more about the alkonost and the siren of Slavic mythology, the bird of, that brings good fortune or sort of the bird of joy and the bird of sorrow. Although I read an article I can't remember who wrote it right now. I'm so sorry, but I read an article about them in which the author proposed that the bird of sorrow isn't so much a bird of sorrow as it is that she's a bird of the inevitable. And so, and that there's all that kind of oversimplification of things like light and dark, meaning good and bad, but that it was actually much more complex. That the alkonost symbolized sort of burgeoning and growth and springing forth, and then the siren represented the subconscious as well as endings and decay. And yes, a place to put sometimes our grieving emotions or our sorrowful emotions, but also a place to put our fear of change. And I thought that that was kind of a timely thing, that it was happening in our month of Ornithomancy, that I received that coffee divination and then kind of followed up. And then an artist that I really like published drawings of those two beings, like within 2 days of me seeing that and reading the article. So I felt like and feel like there's some message that's evolving there for me about my connection with my lineage and how I process my own emotions and how my inner landscape and my mythic landscape are kind of coming in tune. And so then to have all those fun, sweet little orange and black dark-faced juncos as the kind of alkonost manifestation friends and people around and light and life, and then those swirling vultures as kind of the siren of and death and decay. And in order for something to be reborn, it needs to grow out of a matrix, which is out of compost and decay. It was a really profound messaging for me this month as we delved into this theme of ornithomancy, maybe even more so this year than in prior years. Although I am somebody who pays attention to the birds. Typically for me, it's either the first bird of the day or, as we discussed, significant or unusual birds, and then always the first bird of the car trip.
The road trip bird sightings are very important.
That's right.
It's so interesting. What you just described is really the goal of the training that we lead. It's for women to cultivate that sense of it's a synthesis of what we perceive in the world, how we process that through our own emotions and spirit, and how that is woven into the mythology that we create as sibyls in the world.
It's one of the questions that has been central to my practice. When someone comes to see me, are they then going and changing their life because I saw fate are they then going and changing their life because someone told them they could? But I actually think in the context of worshiping the gods, that really when someone comes to see me and then goes on to change their life, it's because through me, they showed themselves to the goddesses that I partner with in my work. And through me, they saw themselves in the eyes of the goddesses with so much love and empowerment and potential and possibility. And also with some hard truths and investigating the shadow and looking at the more Siren bird kind of topics of life as well. But it is, I think, ultimately for our program that the women walk away with the self-trust as readers, and that their querents will walk away with the self-trust that they actually do have some say in their own destiny.
Well, that's a perfect segue to a quote that I gathered to cap our wonderful discussion today. This is a quote by Iamblichus, a 3rd century philosopher. Only sacred divination united with the gods truly gives a share in the divine life, participating in foreknowledge and divine thoughts, and truly makes us divine.
Bravo, as they would say in Delphi. Bravo. I agree. True then as now. Well, thank you, Devanna, for this wonderful conversation today. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us in our maiden voyage of the Via Carmen Pythia podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's Maxim and divination topic. Please subscribe and meet us next month for our investigation of the Maxim Honor the Hearth and the topic of pyromancy. Burn, baby, burn. See you.
Thank you for listening to the Via Carmen Pythia podcast with your hosts Yeshe Mariemana Matthews and Devanna Wolf. Tune in each month for an exploration of the Delphic Maxims and divinations. This podcast is a project of the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple and the Wild Empress, sponsored by nonsensevent.com, providing you with magical experiences on the island of Crete, Idols Art Quality Museum reproductions, and Prometheus shop in Delphi. For more information, to listen to past episodes, or to explore our 2-year Via Carmen Pythia training, visit mtshastagoddesstemple.com or wildempressmagic.com. Our artistic producer is Aldo Ludovico with music by Albert Robles. You can find this podcast on Apple, SoundCloud, and YouTube. And remember, while you live, shine on. Have no grief at all. Life exists only for a short while, and time demands its due.